What we have here is everything we need as far as material. I have a pen here in the middle. This is a Jr Gent 2nd generation fountain pen. This is basically identical to what I'll be showing you how to make. Right here I have my kits, my kit components. It has the tubes, everything you need for the pen inside here. And then over here I have a blank that's already cut apart and it has the tubes inside it. But this is what I'll actually be making today. But in order to show you the complete process, I will be cutting and gluing the tubes in this zebra wood blank. Okay, the first thing we need to do is measure and cut the blank to length. I have both the tubes here, and they are both different lengths, so you need to make sure you measure each one. So, just measure and mark them. Make sure you leave about at least an 1/8 inch leeway so you have room to trim and room for your saw blade. Now, something that's important if you want to match up the grain is you need to mark on one side of the piece of wood right over the side where you will be cutting, so before you turn them, you're able to match them up. So we just put one mark right across the cut line. Alright, next we need to drill the holes. This is my setup for drilling on the lathe. We've got a regular drill chuck in the solid end. We've got a G3 Nova jaw clamp in the spinning head. So we'll clamp this inside the jaws. Be sure it's centered. Alright, now we are ready to glue in the tubes. One thing you need to make sure before you glue the tubes in is use a piece of sandpaper and scuff up the surface of the tubes. You find not everybody does this, but it does help the CA adhere to the wood and the metal better. I'm using medium CA for this. Sure to twist the tube as it goes in to make sure the CA gets around evenly on all the edges. And that is how you put the tubes into the blanks. The next thing you'll need to do is, before we put on the lathe, is we'll have to trim off the edges using a end trimmer like this one. Just simply just enough to expose the edge of that brass tube. Alright, and now they are ready to get put on the lathe. So now we will switch blanks to these that are already completely dry and glued up, and we will start to turn them. Now we are ready to start turning. I have my blank here, and one thing to make sure is we made that indelible line, but that will be cut away when we turn it down. So one thing I figured out is using a double marker and mark the inside of the tube. That way when it's all finished and everything, you'll be able to look at the tube and know which end is the middle. Alright, stick it on here. What I'm using here is just a digital caliper from Amazon for about 15 bucks. It's very accurate actually. With wood, since I'll be putting a CA finish on the wood when it's finished, I actually want to make the wood about 0.1/10 of a millimeter smaller than the actual size of these rings. That will allow for space of the CA then, and we'll be able to build it out to the exact size. Alright, now let's double check the measurements. Alright, now we are ready to apply CA. As we apply CA, we're going to want to be checking with the caliper too, so we can have it just, well, actually we'll want to bring it up just slightly bigger than what the metal components are, so then we can use the skew and gently shave off just the outer layer of the CA to get it perfectly smooth. Alright, I have some medium CA here and a paper towel. I will simply hold the paper towel underneath the tube as it is spinning and apply the CA on top. One thing you want to make sure when you do this part is you are very clean, you don't have much dust on you, because you don't want any dust to get inside that layer of CA. Alright, looks like that's going to be enough coats. Now I will use a skew, and I want to make sure it's extra sharp now. And I will shave down the CA to make it perfectly smooth, get rid of any ridges, and get it exact to the size. Well, actually, when you measure the components, in order to get a perfect fit, you want to measure slightly bigger, about 5/100ths. About 5/100ths larger than the components. That will ensure when you're sliding your fingers on the pen, you don't feel any of the corners of the metal when you're sliding across it. Even though the caliper might say it's the correct size, you'll still be able to feel a very slight lip there. And that's making it very slightly bigger, about 5/100ths of a millimeter, will decrease that, and you won't actually feel it at all. You will not be able to find the edge if you get a good caliper fit. Alright. Alright, now we're ready for buffing. I use micro mesh sanding sheets actually, and I cut them down to this correct size. It proceeds from, I believe, about 600 or 900 grit all the way to 12,000. So it gives a super high shine on your pen and produces a beautiful look if you like that. For each layer of these sheets, I will dip it in water because it's going to be a wet buff. So I'll dip it in water and then buff it. And then in between each sheet, I'll dry it off with the rag in order to leave no sanding particles before to scratch it. Another thing is to be sure you spend the same amount of time for each grit. If you spend too much time on a lower grit and then go to a higher grit and spend too little time, you won't get rid of the scratches from the previous grit, and your overall finish will have small scratches in it. This tube is now done. Looking alike, see a nice shine on it. Notice on these edges it's got the CA glue sort of overlapped. So once we have both tubes finished, we'll take it to a sander and we'll very lightly sand that off. That'll give a nice clean edge to meet up with the components. Alright, now sometimes you'll notice with soft woods like this one, you will get chipping like that around the edges. So occasionally you'll have to fill those, which one good way to do it is to get a little bit of the dust, fill the hole or the crack, chip, with the dust, and then apply just a few drops of CA over that specific area. That'll seep into all that dust, and it'll give it the correct color. It's actually best to use thin CA for this because it's easy to soak in. Let that soak in. Sometimes it may appear a little darker, but once it's completely finished, especially with this wood, it has all the little black lines, so this sort of meshes in and you'll hardly even notice it's a crack. Now we'll use the skew again and smooth that down, get it back down to the surface of the rest of the wood. And there we have our second tube completed. And as you can see, right there is where it chipped, but it sort of blends in with the wood, and you'll never guess that that's an actual chip that's filled. Alright, now we need to sand off these edges here, all those rough edges on either side of both the tubes. So we'll sand those off on this big belt sander. Alright, now both edges are nice and clean and flat. Alright, now occasionally after you're done sanding, you actually get a slight edge right there on the very edge of the tube. So I'll stick them back on the lathe, and I'll use just a few of the highest grit sanding pads to just very lightly get rid of that burr. Alright, now they are ready to apply the components. Alright, now we are ready to assemble the pen components and the tubes. Start out with the smaller tube. Remember, we have a bigger side and a smaller side, so we make sure we select the right components that will fit it. You gotta be very careful during this part so the piece is not going crooked and cause the wood to crack. Before you get it completely tight, go and stick the other side on. That'll keep the edges of the opposite side from getting damaged. Make sure that's nice and tight on there. Rotate it to be sure all edges get firmly up against the tube. But don't press too hard, or else you'll bend the components or cause the CA to separate from the wood, and that's not good. Okay, that side's done. And now we're ready for this side. Remember, we need to look on this side for the marker on the inside so we know which side goes to the middle of the pen and which side goes to the outside. So this side is a marker, so this side is going to have this part in it, but first we'll put on the clip end. Make sure that goes in there straight. Alright, now that that ends on, we'll go ahead and screw this on here, and then get this to line up the best. So about there. And push it on. Let's be sure the grain matches then. Alright, and there we have the cap. And you can't even feel the difference between the wood and the metal. That's perfect. That's what you want. That's the advantages to having a digital caliper, is you get exact measurements and everything fits perfectly. Now I'll stick the nib end on here. And the end. And now we have a pen. And there you go. That is how you make a pen.